Thanks for joining us.
This is CNN.
At CNN in Hong Kong, I'm Christy Lustau.
And I'm Andrew Stevens. Welcome to CNN Today. Coming up.
We, the jury in the above entitled case, find the defendant not guilty of a lewd act upon a minor child as charged in count 5 of the indictment.
Not guilty on all counts. Michael Jackson returns home a free man after a jury acquits him in the child molestation case.
And for the first time in a year, Iraq and the world get another glimpse of Saddam Hussein as he prepares to stand trial.
And 5 African presidents visit their US counterpart who pledges to speed up the flow of financial aid. It's 7 a.m. here in Hong Kong, 4 p.m. in Santa Maria, California, where pop star Michael Jackson has just been found not guilty on all counts by the jury in his trial.
Now, Jackson faced the judgment on 10 felony counts, including 4 counts of committing a lewd act on a child under the age 14. The verdict was a total vindication for Jackson, who has maintained his innocence from the start. I will have more live coverage on this story in just a moment. First,
well, those are the headlines. Now, back to our top story, the verdict in the Michael Jackson trial.
And for more on Jackson's acquittal on all charges, we take you to CNN USA's live coverage.
By the end of it, by the end of all the verdicts have been read, the family obviously very relieved, but very little sound in the courtroom. The judge had admonished us. He didn't want to hear any jubilation, any unhappiness about anything that was read in that courtroom, and people really observed that. The family, of course, standing up, hugging. Michael Jackson then turned to each of his attorneys and hugged each of his attorneys, and it was at that point they did take the media out of the courtroom, and the jury went back and, of course, is doing this press conference, which has been fascinating, where they're talking about the...
Yeah, what surprised you most? I mean, the jurors, they continue to speak. They've been speaking for quite a while. Clearly, they were not impressed, to say the least, with the mother of the accuser.
No, and that's what many of us here had been saying all along. The credibility of the mother was huge, and at least 2 of the jurors took offense because apparently during her testimony she snapped her fingers. At one point, snapped her fingers and said, "People in our culture don't do that." Looked directly at one of the Hispanic jurors who turned out to be the foreman, and he thought to himself, that's in my culture. She's snapping her fingers at me. He said that really turned me off. Some of the other ones saying that a closet full of evidence, but it just really wasn't enough. And another thing that was interesting was, many people saying, well, Michael Jackson, he's strange, he's kooky, he's weird. Well, a couple of the jurors said they didn't feel that way. They felt he was someone that they could walk up to on the street and say hello to. So just some very interesting insights into what they saw during the trial.
Rusty, we're seeing pictures right now of Michael Jackson when he was leaving the courtroom. He looks stunned, just kind of holding his hand up, not even really reacting to the crowd. He then seemed to kind of liven up a little bit before he stepped into his SUV, gesticulating a little bit more. But in the courtroom itself, you said he cried a little bit? Is that what you said?
Well, it's difficult to say cried, Anderson, because I was directly behind him. He did not move. He stared straight ahead while the clerk was reading. But there was also a camera in the courtroom for our overflow listening room, and a couple of folks in there said they did see him pick up a Kleenex at one point, about the 3rd or 4th count, and dabbed his eyes. But that was it. There were not huge smiles. There was not this great, sigh of relief. You couldn't see anything like that. So really, not the jubilation that you would expect for a verdict like this.
It is a fascinating afternoon. We're going to be covering it all this hour. Rusty, we'll talk to you a little bit later on. Rusty, thanks. Neverland now, Michael Jackson's private live-in amusement park devoted to happiness. Well, it has been a pretty unhappy place, as you can imagine, these past few months. The mood there, well, it must have brightened today. You might think of it now as happily ever after. And Brooke Anderson is standing by the Jackson Ranch, where Jackson is now. Brooke, what's the scene there?
Oh, jubilation is the scene, Anderson. Michael Jackson arrived home a short time ago from the courthouse after hearing his fate, after hearing he was acquitted of all 10 charges, and he was greeted by a horde of fans. There are hundreds of fans, about 200 fans here now. They keep arriving in droves. I spoke to one lady. She said this was the happiest day of her life. Defense attorney Tom Mesereau arrived here a short time ago as well, about 15 minutes ago, to go see Michael Jackson and the family. The crowd surrounded his car, chanted Mesereau, 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 and chanted thank you, thank you, thank you. A big scene here, a triumphant scene. Also some presence of law enforcement here. We've got highway patrol cars and officers here. Michael Jackson's Neverland fire truck also made its way to the front gate a little bit earlier. We've had some Neverland employees also showing their excitement. I saw chefs, I saw housekeepers walk to the front of the gate, pump their fists in triumph. So it is a scene of jubilation, and here at Neverland the party just keeps on growing. Anderson, an interesting point to make: about a week and a half ago I was here when the head of security exited the gate, made an impromptu speech to the fans and said, when it is an appropriate time, we will celebrate. So there is a celebration going on behind me. I don't know if they have anything formal planned in the future, when that would be, who would be invited, but like I said, everyone elated here at Neverland.
We'll be, of course, waiting to see if there's any kind of statement from any of the Jackson family or Jackson camp at Neverland. We'll check in with you a little bit later on. A lot of people weighed in about the trial. The only opinion, of course, that really counted in the end was the jury's. Today they spoke first with their verdict and then in front of the cameras. CNN's Ted Rollins is live in Santa Maria with more on the jury's reaction. Ted, what surprised you most?
Well, Anderson, they're still talking. That surprised us in the amount of information that they have given us. They didn't like the mother in this case, and they kept referring to the instructions they were given, saying that reasonable doubt was not achieved. They say they worked hard. They said they were surprised that they were able to come to a verdict today, saying that the weekend really helped them clear their mind and come to a consensus. They also said that if they met Michael Jackson on the street, they'd say he's just a regular guy.
We all came in with our personal beliefs, and some of those did differ, but we spent a lot of time really seriously studying the evidence and looking at the testimony and the jury instructions, and obviously came to an agreement.
As a parent, it's something that you are constantly, every moment of your day, you're protective over what happens to your children. And I guess I might be speaking maybe for myself and a few others, jurors, that, what mother in her right mind would allow that to happen, or just freely volunteer your child, to sleep with someone, and not just so much Michael Jackson, but any person for that matter. So that's something, that mothers, I think, are naturally concerned with.
It's very emotional, and I wasn't the only one crying, okay? Even though it might be because I'm sitting up front, all right, I had to pass it around. But after deliberating for as long as we did, and emotions everybody goes through, and just everything, it just realize that it's done and it's over, and that we all can now go on with our lives.
And the jurors said when they go on with their lives, it will be with each other to some extent. They plan to keep in contact. One saying, I gained 19 friends going through this process clearly, and you could see it in the courtroom day after day. They got along, and I think that helped them, and they said that helped them during the deliberative process. Anderson.
Ted, I heard one of the jurors commenting about some of the literature, or perhaps literature is too fancy or highfalutin a term for some of the, porn magazines, or whatever they were, or the artistic books of photographs of naked children. The guy I saw commenting, I think it was the jury foreman, said, they may be disturbing, not my cup of tea, but they're not illegal. So those images didn't seem to play a big role with the jury.
And they said that they kept referring to the jury instructions. It came down to reasonable doubt, which is what the instruction is. They said that they looked through the porn, they looked at the fingerprints, and then you're right. In the end, they said it's legal to possess, and it is what it is. We followed our instructions. This was our verdict.
We're going to play more of what the jury had to say a little bit later on tonight on 360. Ted, we'll check in with you shortly. Now, of course, begins the guesswork. What went right for Jackson? Where did the prosecution go so wrong? Prosecution gave a press conference, helping us cover all the angles tonight. Two people who have followed this trial from the get-go. CNN senior legal analyst Jeffrey Toobin joins us from Washington, and from Santa Maria, defense attorney Ann Bremner. Ann, let's start out with you because you are there. Your thoughts? Surprised?
No, I'm not. Either verdict, guilty or not guilty on all counts, would have been rationally based on the evidence. And the prosecution faltered and failed in their case in many ways. And I thought for a long time there could be an acquittal or a hung jury. That having been said, they gained momentum at the end, and I thought there was a specter of conviction on some of the counts. But that was, some momentum, but not clearly that there would be a conviction. So I'm not surprised. There's a lot of jubilation out here today. There's not a lot of shock out here, frankly, Anderson. It's not like the O.J. Simpson verdict where people's jaw drops. This is simply one that I think was rationally based.
Jeffrey, jurors said, they weighed all the evidence and they couldn't name one particular thing that really swayed them. Is there one particular thing the prosecution could have, should have done differently?
One big thing, and that is count one, the conspiracy count. I have never seen a trial where a single count dragged down a prosecution more than this one. Just to refresh people's memory, count one, Jackson was charged with conspiring with his employees to hold the accuser's family essentially prisoner, kidnapping them after the Martin Bashir documentary ran in 2000. Count was just almost no evidence that Jackson be conspiracy. But far worse than that is that the evidence that the government put on to try to prove that count, to putting on the mother saying she was a victim of kidnapping and company, was so implausible and so bad that it dragged down the entire prosecution and it allowed the defense to put the accuser's family on trial. So the decision to charge count one was the fatal flaw in this prosecution.
Well, let's play a little bit of what Tom Sneddon had to say after all the not guilty verdicts were in. He gave a press conference. Thankfully, this time he didn't tell too many jokes at press conferences.
My past history of Mr. Jackson had absolutely, unequivocally, nothing to do with our evaluation of this particular case. That's been a nice little 30-second soundbite that the media has used to try to justify this thing, but it had never had anything to do with either the sheriff's investigation or our decision to file.
And did Sneddon just blow this case?
Well, I don't think you can fault him with bringing the case of child molestation against Jackson. After all, he did have Michael Jackson admitting that he slept in the same bed with this boy, and then he had this boy saying, Michael Jackson molested me when we were sleeping in the same bed. So it's not a crazy, fanciful prosecution. However, prosecutors need not to overcharge their cases. And by trying to create this conspiracy charge, which based on, sometimes when you see a trial, you think, well, maybe he's guilty, but they didn't prove it. With that conspiracy charge, I am convinced that Michael Jackson is absolutely innocent of that. And it's a rare prosecution that I sit through where I think there's just not even a chance that the defendant's even guilty.
There's a lot to talk about, and we want to talk to you a little bit later on. Jeffrey, as well, we're going to bring you back in just a few minutes. I just got to move on to some other things. We'll talk to you again shortly.
All right. Now, we will have more on the Michael Jackson acquittal later in this hour, but when we come back, some other news. The U.S. President praised 5 African nations for setting a democratic example.
But the leaders of those nations told Mr. Bush his aid plans do have a problem. We'll have more on what they said and Mr. Bush's response.
And in our business update, the former head of Daewoo Kum's home is featured clouded by expected corruption charges.
We're also following the weather in parts of China, where floods have turned deadly over recent days. Stay with us.
Today on CNN.
A verdict is reached in the Michael Jackson trial. The jury finds him not guilty on all counts. Officials in Iraq released new video of Saddam Hussein as magistrates question him on a number of criminal charges. And the British Prime Minister holds talks with the German Chancellor ahead of this week's EU summit.
For the latest on these stories and more, watch CNN Today.
This is CNN.
From CNN in Hong Kong, I'm Andrew Stevens.
And I'm Christy Lee Stout. You're watching CNN Today.
First, let's take a look at some of the top stories we are following. The jury in the Michael Jackson trial found the entertainer not guilty on all 10 felony counts in his child molestation trial. It was a complete vindication for Jackson, who has maintained his innocence from the time the charges were filed. 5 African leaders have told US President George W. Bush that his major aid programs are too slow in getting help to countries that need it. Mr. Bush has promised to, quote, work harder and faster, unquote, to speed up aid to the region. 14 people, including members of the security forces, have been killed by a car bomb in the Indian state of Jammu and Kashmir. The blast went off near a school and at least 2 students are among the dead. No one has claimed responsibility for the explosion. The Iraqi tribunal planning the trial of Saddam Hussein released video of him being interrogated on Sunday. The tape does not contain audio. The tribunal says the questioning pertained to one of several cases expected to be used in charging the ousted Iraqi president with war crimes and crimes against humanity.
And returning to our top story, pop star Michael Jackson has been acquitted. The jury in his Santa Maria, California child molestation trial returned not guilty verdicts on all 10 felony counts. Peter Viles takes a look back at the trial.
Which image will you remember? Maybe Michael Jackson jumping on the roof of his SUV to salute his fans? Maybe the day he showed up in his pajamas so late for court he almost got arrested? Or the parade of celebrities to the Santa Maria courthouse? Jay Leno, Macaulay Culkin, Larry King. The circus atmosphere at times almost overshadowed the seriousness of the charges against him.
Violation of the California Penal Code, commonly known as child molestation.
The state alleges that over several weeks in 2003 at his Neverland Ranch, Jackson molested a 13-year-old boy after plying him with alcohol. In all, Jackson faces 10 felony charges, 4 counts of molestation, 1 count of attempted molestation, 4 counts related to alcohol, and a conspiracy charge that Jackson conspired to hold the boy and his family captive inside Neverland. Over time, Jackson did switch lawyers, but not defenses.
Michael Jackson is unequivocally and absolutely innocent of these charges.
The accuser's younger brother testified he saw Jackson groping his brother while the boy was asleep. Then the alleged victim, now 15, testified facing down the pop star and telling the jury Jackson sexually abused him on several occasions.
It was a little bit of a stare down going on between the boy and Michael Jackson during the testimony, whereas at times before that, the boy would talk to the jury. If you notice, when he was talking about that molestation, and especially on cross-examination, he was looking at Michael Jackson.
Another prosecution witness testified he saw Jackson perform oral sex on another boy, and yet another witness testified he had been fondled by Jackson as a boy.
He broke down. He said, "This is very hard for me. It's taken a lot of counseling." He was very believable, and he was dynamite for the prosecution.
The Jackson defense was really an attack, painting the accuser and his family as manipulative scam artists. The key confrontation, Thomas Mesro's cross-examination of the alleged victim's mother.
She really backfired for prosecutors. She was very brassy on the stand. She was argumentative, and also she reeked of insincerity. You just didn't believe her story. She was too ham-boned. She turned and addressed the jurors very dramatically every time she answered a question. She argued with the lead defense attorney, Tom Mesro. She just imploded on the stand.
Called by the prosecution, Jackson's ex-wife, Debbie Rowe, seemed to help the defense. She called Jackson a wonderful father who was manipulated by, quote, vultures around him. Defense witness Macaulay Culkin portrayed Jackson as harmless, saying he did sleep in Jackson's bed but was never molested. Jackson never testified, so he was never cross-examined, but jurors did hear from him through videotapes played for the jury, in which Jackson declared what he called his pure love for children. Peter Viles for CNN, Los Angeles.
Well, we're going to talk now more about the Michael Jackson trial and the verdict with Kendall Coffey. He's a former United States attorney and he joins us now from Miami. Kendall, thanks very much for joining us. There was a lot of comment at the weekend saying that the case going into its second week was going to be bad news for Michael Jackson. The longer it went, the worse the prospects were for Michael Jackson. Are you surprised by the verdict at all?
Well, longer deliberations are actually usually good for defense. Surprised about the verdict? In the sense that the prosecution threw so much at Michael Jackson and plenty of mud, seemed like he was going to get convicted of something. But it's not an upsetting verdict because when you get right down to it, as the defense pointed out with just about every prosecution witness, there were plenty of questions about the prosecution's case. And the jury followed the instructions faithfully, found a reasonable doubt. Doesn't mean they were sure if Michael Jackson's a blameless guy, but they were sure about one thing. There was at least a reasonable doubt as to whether he was guilty of the crimes he was being charged with.
Just on that point about the defence going for the prosecution witnesses, did you sense during the trial that the defence was on the right strategy, which was all about the real credibility of a lineup of people sort of testifying against Jackson?
Totally. They had a clear theme from day one. They weren't just kind of picking holes in this prosecution witness or that witness. They focused in like a heat-seeking missile on the accuser's family, saying that the mom was a scheming, scamming manipulator who put her kids up to a pack of lie in order to turn Michael Jackson into a gigantic ATM machine for millions of dollars. And that kind of theme obviously worked, and more importantly, it was supported by a lot of the facts, including past lawsuits that she'd been involved with, and by the way, including some clear-cut evidence that the mom and some other family members had lied multiple times in the past.
I want to ask you about the prosecutor, Tom Seddon. He's been after, really, Michael Jackson for more than 10 years now. Do you think this finally draws a line under Michael Jackson? Do you think that Tom Seddon now will let it go at this, or do you think there's a chance still for more action in the future?
Well, I wouldn't rule out what could happen in the future. The only thing I'm sure of is just as Michael Jackson wrote a song about this prosecutor's alleged vindictiveness in the past, I bet some future album of Michael Jackson's going to have another song about this prosecutor.
Okay, well, the whole process, I mean, again, described as a circus going on, certainly looked like a circus outside the courtroom. But inside the courtroom, Kendall, the judge ran a fairly tight ship. You think everything was conducted as it should have been?
Absolutely. This judge was in control of the trial from day one, and that contributed, I think, to the jury's conscientiousness. When the judge is totally in charge and then instructs them in considerable detail about everything from what kind of weight do you give to allegations of the past and what is the importance of reasonable doubt, you've got a judge whose instructions are going to be very carefully listened to and fully honored by the jury. And I think that had a lot to do with the result that was rendered today.
How pivotal do you think the testimony of Debbie Rowe, the former wife of Michael Jackson, was?
Well, I think that could have been one of the turning points in the case, not just because it exploded in the face of the prosecution with a kind of credibility harm that very easily could have carried over to others, but she also defined Michael Jackson. She talked about him in glowing terms as a good and loving father. She also talked about the vultures around him. And that, I think, was essential to explaining a lot of the very strange and troubling dynamics that surrounded Michael Jackson. Along the same line, I think the prosecution made a huge mistake trying to say that Macaulay Culkin was a victim of molestation. He too got on the stand. He too defined Michael Jackson as well as this dynamic of vultures around him. And I think those were the kind of mistakes that the prosecution made that in no small way contributed to Michael Jackson being acquitted today.
CNN legal analyst Kendall Coffey, thanks very much for joining us.
Hey, thank you, Andrew.
Oh, no.
Today on CNN.
A verdict is reached in the Michael Jackson trial. The jury finds him not guilty on all counts. Officials in Iraq released new video of Saddam Hussein as magistrates question him on a number of criminal charges. And the British Prime Minister holds talks with the German Chancellor ahead of this week's EU summit.
For the latest on these stories and more, watch CNN Today.
You got your cricket fix, and up ahead, in the wake of Michael Jackson's acquittal, attention is turning to what happened in the jury room and what comes next for the pop singer.
Ahead in the next hour, more on our extensive coverage of Jackson and his day in court.
Also ahead, the renewed push among
Hello, it's 8 a.m. here in Hong Kong, 5 p.m. in Santa Maria, California, where the pop superstar Michael Jackson has been found not guilty on all counts by the jury in his trial.
Now, Jackson faces judgment on 10 felony counts, including 4 counts of committing a lewd act on a child under age 14. The verdict was a total vindication for Jackson, who has maintained his innocence from the start. And we'll have more live coverage on this story in just a moment. But first, crimes against humanity.
Well, those are the headlines. Now let's get back to our top story, the verdict in the Michael Jackson trial.
And for more on Jackson's acquittal on all charges, we take you to CNN USA's live coverage.
Review in our office, just like we reviewed this one.
You wouldn't shy from it now?
Well, the answer to the question, truthfully, is I probably wouldn't if it was a good case. But I think we all learned some lessons here that we thought we had a good case this time.
What lessons have you learned?
Well, I was referring probably more than anything else to the celebrity factor.
In the end, was the jury swayed by the celebrity factor? They met with reporters as a group and answered that question point blank.
We all came in with our personal beliefs, and some of those did differ, but we spent a lot of time really seriously studying the evidence and looking at the testimony and the jury instructions, and obviously came to an agreement.
Tonight, we're going to try to answer these questions. Why did Michael Jackson walk free? We're going to look at what went wrong for the prosecution, what went right for the defense. And coming up next, is California justice different for celebrities? Finally, what's next for Michael Jackson? With me now in Washington, senior legal analyst Jeffrey Toobin. From Los Angeles tonight, Marcia Clark, who prosecuted O.J. Simpson, and Pamela Hayes, an attorney and former prosecutor here in New York, now a defense attorney. Good to have all three of you with us. Okay, trio, one of the things I heard a lawyer say this evening was the mother was smoking gun Exhibit A. Let's share with our audience what juror after juror had to say about the accuser's mother.
What mother in her right mind would allow that to happen, or you know, just freely volunteer your child, you know, to sleep with someone?
The mother, when she looked at me and snapped her fingers a few times, and she says, "You know how our culture is," and winks at me, I thought, no, that's not the way our culture is.
So Jeffrey Toobin, was this case lost for the prosecution the minute the accuser's mother took the witness stand?
Yes, and it didn't have to happen. The reason this woman was a central figure in the prosecution's case was that the government charged Jackson with conspiring to imprison her and her family. That charge was an albatross that destroyed this prosecution. If they had simply charged him with child molestation, the mother wouldn't even have been a prosecution witness. The case would have been half the length or less, and instead they made a terrible decision to bring a charge that Jackson was clearly innocent of, and it not only sunk that charge, but the rest of the case with it.
Marcia Clark, do you really think that Michael Jackson could be looking or would have been looking at prison time tonight down the road if the case had been streamlined and if the prosecutor had narrowed the charge to the molestation charge?
I have to say, no, I don't think it would have mattered. And I do have to say that I agree with Jeffrey. Absolutely. The conspiracy charge was something that many of us agreed should not have been filed. It was a weak charge. It was an unnecessary charge. These are difficult cases, Paula. Child molest cases always very hard. And that made it that much harder because you're premising a felony count of conspiracy on the testimony of a witness who was a problem right from the start. This was no surprise. This was not something that jumped out of the box on the prosecution in the middle of trial. Right from the beginning, they knew she was a troublemaker, and she was not somebody that needed to be called without that conspiracy charge. So don't file the charge. However, having said all of that, and I don't think the charge should have been filed, and I don't think she should have been called, and I don't think it would have hurt the prosecution all that much if the defense had called her. Having said all of that, I still think Michael Jackson would have walked on this case. I don't think it would have made any difference, because I think celebrity trumps everything. Everything. And I thought maybe it was something endemic only to Los Angeles. I now think that's just the way it is. His celebrity, I think, blocked out the sun. The jurors say no. I say they don't even realize subconsciously what an impact it has. Because what happens, Paula, is that a celebrity, especially of the magnitude of Michael Jackson, he's huge. He's huge. He's like 10 times bigger than O.J. Simpson ever was. Someone like that walks in, and the jury feels like this heavy weight, this burden about convicting somebody this gigantic, and the burden of proof goes up to an impossible standard. Beyond a reasonable doubt becomes beyond all possible doubt. They're not even aware of it, I think, a lot of times. Some are not. And I think that's what happens, and I think that's why we got the acquittals, not because he wasn't proven.
Pam, you just heard what Marcia Clark had to say, and yet one of the jurors said quite forcefully, hogwash. We looked beyond that, and we looked at Michael Jackson like any other individual. Had he not been a celebrity, would he be looking at prison time tonight?
They would have never brought the charges. This was all a orchestration by the prosecutor.
So wait, so you're saying the charges were only filed because he was a celebrity?
Yeah.
So you're saying the exact opposite of what Marcia said?
Absolutely. The problem in this case was the mother and the complaining witness. They were both self-admitted liars. Once you have a witness that says, I'll lie under oath for money, it's all over. There isn't a jury in the world who's going to, help them to get on with their scheme to defraud Michael Jackson. I really felt that these people were self-admitted liars. They defrauded J.C. Penney. They came to court and said, yeah, we lied, and couldn't give an explanation why. And this woman had been doing this, the welfare fraud, and she's teaching this poor young man to do it. It was quite obvious. It had nothing to do with celebrity. They just wasn't going to accept the word of a liar.
I think everybody in our panel would agree tonight.
That was CNN USA's coverage of the acquittal of pop star Michael Jackson. Back to CNN International and back to some other news stories. The U.S. president has promised to speed up.
This is CNN.
From CNN in Hong Kong, I'm Christy Loostow.
And I'm Andrew Stevens. You're watching CNN Today. Ahead this hour, spreading the word. Egyptian opposition members find a high-tech way of raising their profiles without having to raise a lot of money.
And keeping their cool. Japanese businessmen get a new look for the summer.
First, to look at some of the top stories we are following. The jury in the Michael Jackson trial found the entertainer not guilty on all 10 felony counts in his child molestation trial. It was a complete vindication for Jackson, who has maintained his innocence from the time the charges were filed. 5 African leaders have told the US President George W. Bush that his major aid programs are too slow in getting help to countries that need it. Mr. Bush has promised to work, quote, harder and faster, unquote, to speed up aid to the region. 14 people, including 3 policemen, have been killed by a car bomb in the Indian state of Jammu and Kashmir. The blast went off near a school and at least 2 students are among the dead. No one has claimed responsibility for the explosion. The Iraqi tribunal planning the trial of Saddam Hussein released video of him being interrogated on Sunday. The tape does not contain audio, though. The tribunal says the questioning pertained to one of several cases expected to be used in charging the ousted Iraqi president with war crimes and crimes against humanity.
And returning to our top story, pop star Michael Jackson has been acquitted. The jury in his Santa Maria, California child molestation trial returned not guilty verdicts on all 10 felony counts. Peter Viles takes a look back at the trial.
Which image will you remember? Maybe Michael Jackson jumping on the roof of his SUV to salute his fans? Maybe the day he showed up in his pajamas so late for court he almost got arrested? Or the parade of celebrities to the Santa Maria courthouse? Jay Leno, Macaulay Culkin, Larry King. The circus atmosphere at times almost overshadowed the seriousness of the charges against him.
In violation of the California Penal Code, commonly known as child molestation.
Michael Jackson is unequivocally and absolutely innocent of these charges.
The accuser's younger brother testified he saw Jackson groping his brother while the boy was asleep. Then the alleged victim, now 15, testified facing down the pop star and telling the jury Jackson sexually abused him on several occasions.
It was a little bit of a stare down going on between the boy and Michael Jackson during the testimony, whereas at times before that, the boy would talk to the jury. If you notice, when he was talking about that molestation, and especially on cross-examination, he was looking at Michael Jackson.
Another prosecution witness testified he saw Jackson perform oral sex on another boy, and yet another witness testified he had been fondled by Jackson as a boy.
He broke down. He said, "This is very hard for me. It's taken a lot of counseling." He was very believable, and he was dynamite for the prosecution.
The Jackson defense was really an attack, painting the accuser and his family as manipulative scam artists. The key confrontation, Thomas Mesrow's cross-examination of the alleged victim's mother.
She really backfired for prosecutors. She was very brassy on the stand. She was argumentative. And also, she reeked of insincerity. You just didn't believe her story. She was too ham-boned. She turned and addressed the jurors very dramatically every time she answered a question. She argued with the lead defense attorney, Tom Mesereau. She just imploded on the stand.
Called by the prosecution, Jackson's ex-wife, Debbie Rowe, seemed to help the defense. She called Jackson a wonderful father who was manipulated by, quote, vultures around him. Defense witness Macaulay Culkin portrayed Jackson as harmless, saying he did sleep in Jackson's bed but was never molested. Jackson never testified, so he was never cross-examined, but jurors did hear from him through videotapes played for the jury, in which Jackson declared what he called his pure love for children. Peter Viles for CNN, Los Angeles.
The trial is over and Jackson has been acquitted, but what will be the impact on his career? Well, joining us to discuss that